when you're moving from place to place. Good morning, good morning, morning, good morning, morning.
And continue on this morning at Tobago Updates, our Youth Wednesdays. We are joined with, continuing our program this morning, we are joined with PC Damian Mills of the TTPS and WPC Corbin-Clarke of the TTPS. They are here from the Special Victims Department. Well, they now have a branch, the School Intervention Team, and they'll be touching a little bit on bullying this morning. This morning we touched on the rise in school violence, so now they're going to take us through the legalities of it all, TTPS's role in it. Right, so the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for insight on what TTPS is. Right, so for those viewing, bullying is unwanted aggression towards someone else. Right, it's mostly done among school students, and that is what we are going to talk about this morning. Right, so for my first question, we oftentimes hear the term call the police. What does the legal system actually have in place for things like this?
Okay, so good morning and thank you for having us talk to the public this morning. The legal system in relation to bullying, the first thing I would like to mention is that in Trinidad and Tobago, there is currently no legislation against the term bullying. For something to become law, it has to be legislated, meaning that there has to be a definition placed or affixed to the term in itself and legislated and put out there into the public space. All right, but be that as it may, that does not mean that there isn't anything that can be done. When we go to schools and so on and we talk to the parents at the PTA meetings, we tell them that when you go to the police station and you make a report of bullying, what would normally happen is that the report is forwarded to the community policing department. They would now seek an intervention at the school, or the report will be forwarded to the Special Victims Department Schools Intervention Team, my team, our team, and we would go to the school, have an intervention meeting and so on. However, some parents would like to know in terms of the legal aspect, what can be done legally. And so in law, there is a particular piece of legislation that is called the Offences Against the Persons Act, Chapter 1108. Now, if you were to look at the Offences Against the Persons Act from Section 27 all the way down to Sections 30A and 30B, and you were to put that piece of legislation, it took parallel next to the term bullying, you will see where under Section 30A, it talks about harassment. And under Section 30A, harassment, there are 7 subparagraphs that outlines what are the various actions that a person can perpetrate against another to be able to deem it harassment. And bullying, basically, when you look at the parameters of bullying and you look at the parameters of harassment, they are basically one and the same. So I say to parents, when you go to the police station, we need to remove the term bullying from our vocabulary if we really want something to be done. And we need to let the police know that, listen, my child has been harassed or is being harassed at school. Harassment is a criminal offense, and as such, it must be dealt with as such. Find out from your child what is happening or what has happened, and you need to let the police know exactly what has been happening. For example, from Section 27, as I mentioned earlier, talks about assault and all the different various types of assaults, assault occasioning a wound, grievous bodily harm, and all of these things can be dealt with by way of the court. Now, we're talking about children. And so the first approach is not usually or is not recommended to be of a punitive nature. The approach in dealing with children, we will recommend take a 3-prong approach, meaning, and in this order, preventative. So we want to establish preventative methods. If prevention does not work, then we go to the punitive, meaning children must be taught and they must be made to understand that they can and will be held accountable for their actions. There are consequences to actions. We often talk about Newton's third law. I like to apply physics to life. They say that math is in everyday, is in everyday life. All right? And Newton's third law talks about to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. We need to let children know that they can be charged from as early as age 7. Right? The law provides for the different ages and how those ages are to be treated with. So the punitive. And after the punitive, then we go now to the restorative aspect of things. When we deal with children at schools, I love to give and we love to give assignments. Right? So for example, a school fight, you would now have to go to the police station, look up this said law, Act Chapter 1108, the Offences Against the Persons Act, study it, and prepare for us a well-written essay. And at the end of the essay, you would now have to give your reflections in going forward. What have you learned, and how would you now change from being an aggressor to someone now that supports positive conflict resolution?
So if they thought they were getting away from the homework in school, they actually have homework at the police station.
Of course, we usually give homework because you see, when children do research and so on, they learn, and what they learn will tend to stick.
Okay.
All right, especially in relation to the law. The law is there. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Ignorance basically is a matter of choice, because when laws are passed, they are put into the public space, and so because they are in the public space and they are so easy to acquire, persons not knowing, basically the state cannot be held accountable because it's put out there. The onus is on you. You cannot be abiding by a law that you do not know exists.
Okay.
All right.
So you mentioned what your team would do to bring the student back to where they need to be, given that they have been charged for harassment. Right. So what steps should a teacher take? To what extent would it go to, where the teacher would have to make the report to the police station?
Right. So the first thing we would like to let the teachers know is that bullying must not be tolerated in any way, form, or fashion. When we speak to children, when we lecture to children, children will oftentimes get up and say, "Officer," and we are hearing this too many times, "Officer, we complain to Miss, we complain to Sir, and nothing is being done." When a child recognizes that they are making a complaint, they have a problem, nothing is being done, they are not going to be thinking about taking matters into their own hands.
But what about when teachers, they give discipline, yes, but then the child realizes this discipline done with and I could go back to what I'm doing. So what in that situation, what do you all do?
When you say discipline, what do you mean in terms of, okay, discipline can be, as I mentioned before, punitive, as well as it can be coming from the standpoint of the school. The schools have their protocol in dealing with bullying, in dealing with school violence, and so on. So it would depend as in relation to whether or not the discipline would come from the legal or the law aspect as opposed to the school's aspect. All right? There must be a consequence. And so what teachers can do, get involved immediately. You need to find out, when a report is made to you, find out what is happening, what has been happening, or what has happened. Assure that child that, listen, I heard your information, I took your information, I noted your information, and we are going to try our very best to ensure that you are alleviated as to in relation to this problem. A lot of times we have school fights because something happened, and as a result of something happening to a child, that child retaliates. There's an equation that we have established that we tell children about, and my colleague smiled because we love to tell children about that equation, right? Action plus reaction equals altercation, right?
Okay.
So when you have an action, that action will now foster a reaction. So the reaction could either be positive or negative. You being the one to put forward the reaction, we have to teach them to let it be positive. So teachers can create safe classroom environments by educating children about these things, how to react, emotional intelligence. We should teach them how to not allow their emotions to govern their actions, because there are consequences towards our actions. You do something good, the consequence that will follow will be good. You do something bad, the consequence will be bad.
And if I may add to my colleague,
Sure.
one of the things that we encourage teachers to do is to educate themselves about what the law says as it relates to the Offences Against the Person Act. Because when one of our main role and functions is going to schools and organizations and churches who may have us to speak on these legislations, so they get a better knowledge of whether an offense has been committed, because at the school level they will take the incident first, do their initial investigation, and once they identify that a criminal act took place, then is when they will contact us. But oftentimes we need them to know, because once they know, then they will be able to say, well, this is under the remit of the TTPS and this is what we need to do. But that doesn't negate that they will suspend the student or take the necessary action that they have to take. But of course, the matter is then referred to us when it is they recognize and they identify, and they only do that because our team has been vigorous in going to every secondary, primary, and even preschools on the island of Tobago to allow teachers to know that information. So we speak specifically on the Offences Against the Person Act. We speak on the Children's Act number 12 of 2012 and the Domestic Violence Act. 3 major acts that speaks to abuse and violence and all these things.
Yes, and you said that you all are trying to touch on every school on the island. So in a case where this may not be possible, is this information available to the public? As in the acts and the laws, everything?
Yeah, definitely. One can utilize the World Wide Web. If one were to go on Google and type in, we always advise persons, when you type in the name of the law or the act, be sure to put Trinidad and Tobago, because there are several similar acts out there in the on the worldwide space. All right, so for example, the Children's Act 12 of 2012, Trinidad and Tobago, usually the first option that appears or comes up in PDF format. It's free to download. At the end of every page you would see unofficial version. It means that is the version for the public. It's not the version that comes directly from the law volume. It's just a copy, right? But the copies of every act, once they are legislated and passed and put into the public space, it's available on the World Wide Web. Likewise, there might be persons that are in preference of the physical copies, and so any person can go to any government printery and pay a very small fee and acquire their own personal copy, hard copy. It can be printed, photocopied, shared. So because we tell people about these particular aspects of legislation, inclusive of the Sexual Offences Act. When we go to schools, we try to ensure that all the teachers are brought up to speed. They are educated in relation to the acts that my colleague would have mentioned a while ago: the Children's Act, the Sexual Offences Act, the Offences Against the Persons Act, the Domestic Violence Act. We should know about the parameters and the laws that are contained and that are enshrined within these pieces of legislation, so that we'll be better informed and able to make the right decisions in going forward where the law is concerned. Once we get the information and we get the right information, we will now be able to assist in the best way possible to try to alleviate whatever is the discomfort. At the end of the day, the school must be a safe environment where children can be afforded the privilege to learn in a comfortable and safe space.
All right, and I do agree with you there. You leave the home and you want to focus on learning and not have to deal with the acts of bullying at recess time or lunchtime or whenever. Yes, so I do agree with you there. Physically, children are lashing out. Right, you mentioned the emotional turmoil behind the lashing out, right? So from your experience when visiting schools and stuff like that, dealing with the children whenever they are presented to the police station and stuff like that, what psychological issues are you oftentimes met with?
There are many. For example, there was one occasion quite recently where we were at a school having been called in to treat with a situation, a violent situation where a boy would have struck a girl, causing injury. And in interviewing this young man, he was able to say to us, well, officer, I am angry. I am angry. I've left home angry. I'm always angry at home. My parents are unaware. My father, there's violence at the home. And because of such, I'm not in a position where I could express myself. I cannot tell him I do not like what is going on. I cannot say to my mom I do not like what is going on. So I came to school this morning, and this young lady should have done something, and immediately I just lashed out. And it caused us to realize that, when children come to school, and we have been meeting with children, and this is something that has been happening. Children are coming from homes. I'm not saying that this is the only situation, but children are coming from homes where violence is the way of life, both physically and verbally. This is what they know. And if this is what they know, they would reciprocate and replicate. When they come into the school space, they are going to do what they know. If they know violence, they are going to treat with violence. They are going to treat with situations that may come up against them in a violent manner, which could cause them to having, to be brought before the court, or to have to face criminal liabilities and so on for their actions.
And if I may add, one of the things that we do at the intervention team is partnership. And we partner with the guidance officers and the school social workers in assisting children who may have had those issues and challenges, because psychologically, as officers, that's not our remit, but we work along with these officials in ensuring that the children receive what we call a holistic approach to how they will treat with issues and challenges.
So the gaps are bridged between the TTPS, between the psychologists, between the parents, between the teachers. There's no space left there for uncertainty at all. The team is set up in such a way. I love that. All right, so we mentioned the emotional damage. We're going a little bit back to the physical damage that this causes. Now, as recently as last week, there was a video circulating from one of our high schools, right? A young lady was bullied, I should say, in the classroom. The video was circulated on social media, as I said. A lot of blame has been put on the teachers for lack of supervision. What do you all say toward that? Do you agree that the teachers did indeed lack in responsibility for supervision?
That situation that you just mentioned is currently being actively investigated, and as such, we would not be able to speak on that just yet, pending the outcome, following which the necessary action, if any, will be taken. Nevertheless, what we will say is that in relation to the Children's Act 12 of 2012, persons might not be aware that sections 56 and 57 are quite clear. In particular, 57, section 57 of Act 12 of 2012. And when I say 57, section 57, I'm talking about that particular section that talks about having responsibility. So it mentions parents, guardians, and now persons with responsibility. Persons with responsibility covers everybody except the parents, or in addition, I should say, to the parents, for example, teachers, daycare operators, group leaders, for example, training, sport training, music, whatever you have. Wherever children are and there are persons responsible for the care of these children, that particular piece of legislation, that act, says where a child is convicted of an offense, the court, by virtue of this particular piece of legislation, may call upon such person, meaning the parent, guardian, or person with responsibility, to give due reason and due information as to whether or not the necessary care and supervision was afforded in order to avoid that child from committing that offense which he or she has now so been convicted of. So in other words, if you fail to supervise a child adequately and that child commits an offense and is convicted of that offense, in addition to that child being fined, you will be called into question and asked, and you will have to give reasonable answers and reasons why that child was not supervised and why due care was not afforded in relation to that child to prevent such an act in the first place. Remember, we are dealing with children. We are talking about children. There must never be a situation where a child is left unsupervised. And so this law speaks to that. We have, in our rapport and in our visits at the schools and so on, we have observed that there are schools where children are afforded an unhealthy amount of free time. An unhealthy amount of free time on their hands. And I love, the good book says that foolishness is bounded up in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far away from them. I believe that the rod there talks about leadership, right? Responsibility, care, guidance, and instruction by those that have been placed in a position to lead our children and guide them. So persons can come into face legal ramifications if they were supposed to be supervising children. They have not been doing that. Those children committed crimes and are now convicted of those crimes. You may be called to question and to answer why these children were not adequately supervised. You will have to prove, had these children been supervised, would this offense have occurred? Would this crime, would this act would have occurred? And so on. That's section 57 of 12 of 2012. Section 56 talks about children committing crimes. They can be fined, and in being fined, the court may call upon their parents, guardians, or persons with responsibility. I am stressing on the persons with responsibility, because oftentimes you go out there and you believe, and persons believe, that a child should be the responsibility of their parents. If they do something wrong, only go and talk to their parents. That is not how it is. If you're responsible for the child, then you will have to face those questions.
All right, thank you very much. And in wrapping up, I'm so sorry about the short time that we have. It's a very interesting topic. I hope that we can come back to it later on. But in wrapping up, what advice can you give to the parents of those who are bullied and the parents of bullies, because we can't leave them out,
Yes.
on going forward? How do they stop bullying?
One thing we ask parents to do is to look at children, look for the signs. They must identify whether or not there's a change in that child. And it's important that once you identify that something is going on with your child, to seek the necessary help. As officers, we are located at the Chevron Road Police Station and at Roxborough Police Station. They can contact us at 639-8246. Speak to any one of our officers available. There we provide advice to them as to the way forward, and we ask them to act on it, because we often find that children who are labeled as bullies were once bullied, and so it's very important that they pay attention. We ask them to partner with us as officers. Don't see us as we wear plain clothes in our section, and that's for a reason. The children interact with us. Also, have conversations with your children. Don't speak at them, but speak with them, and they will share. Because when we go into the school, a lot of the children share information with us, and they recognize us now as friends, and not as foe. So we encourage the general public out there, if you see something, say something, and that will help us. And once we partner and we work together, there will be a massive change. And we are seeing that change because of the partnership that we currently hold with parents, with teachers, with all the stakeholders, the Division of Education. Everybody's on board. Now we need the students to get on board, and they can only get on board if we all speak the same language. And that's a zero tolerance policy on any form of violence, crime, bullying, harassment. We say zero tolerance, and once we act together and the children see that, then they will have to come into alignment and to conform.
All right, so thank you so much, WPC Corbin-Clarke and PC Damian Mills, for joining us this morning, telling us a little bit about our bridge gap between the police service, of course, and the schools in terms of harassment and bullying. Thank you so much once again for being on Tobago Updates.
And it was a pleasure being here.
Yes, thank you. We continue this morning with our Devon Stewart documentary premiere. Devon Stewart is a pianist, composer, arranger, and he'll be telling us a little bit about the documentary. All right, so for those of us still with us, continue to share the live, share the live, share the live.